For those of you who are a bit history buffs and are out there, you've only got to look at the fall of Tsar Nicholas II. I think it was the second or first, I can't remember now, but I think it was the second. And his advisor, Rasputin. And you've only got to look of just how much fire Rasputin was really taking at that time for what were really decisions of the Tsar himself. And, just as you look now back historically, you know, Tsar Nicholas was completely incompetent and incapable to rule at that time the Russian Empire. He just made mistake after mistake after mistake. He was not fit to rule. And now we've got a similar situation of Boris, who is a man who is in a position who he coveted for years, but actually had no skills to actually do the job. We've said before, what Boris is a cheerleader. And a cheerleader goes out and rallies the troops. We saw this when he was Mayor of London at the 2012 Olympic Games. You saw this during his many election campaigns. That was his role. He would go out, rally the troops, give a good speech, and that would be it. That was Boris's role. And that's all Boris is. He's a vacant, empty space. And as I once, was saying a couple of weeks ago, Boris is a man without a plan, and a man without a plan doesn't fire the man with one. So the question is now, with Cummings gone, who is the man with the plan in number 10? Because it certainly isn't Boris. And now you have what is going to be a war for influence, which is going to turn into very, very brutal infighting, I can definitely predict, within the Tory party to essentially try and win that coveted advisor role of, that to be the new Wormwood, to use the Lord of the Rings, Wormtongue, that's it, Wormtongue, to use the Lord of the Rings reference. To be the one whispering in Boris's ear, to be pointing him in the right direction. Because Boris doesn't even point himself in the right direction. So, we're going to go over this once again, because I think this just highlights just the problem of just how vacant a person Boris Johnson really is. And could the writing be on the wall of what we've been hearing for a while now, that even Boris Johnson wants to go. So this comes from The Guardian, and it's, now that Rasputin Cummings has fallen, who will grasp control of Tsar Boris? Tory MPs started preparing celebratory laps of Bernard Castle when they heard that Dominic Cummings was being defenestrated from number 10. Many ministers had been at the Champagne, and just about the entire civil service is whooping with relief. For the past 16 months, there have been the most powerful and most rebative unelected advisor ever to inhibit number 10. His fanciful self-defeating flaw was that he never mastered how to use his clout productively rather than destructively. Intoxicated by his past campaign successes, he couldn't grasp the difference between fighting and governing. He talked a bellicose game to journalists and used them as his megaphones. The BBC would be whacked. A hard rain was going to lash the civil service. He was absolutely right, and absolutely everything, and anyone who didn't get with his programme, including cabinet ministers and Conservative MPs, could be told to get lost. Yet, in the end, here he was exiled, without leaving much a trace, comments one former cabinet minister. 6 senior civil servants, including cabinet secretary, were pushed out, only to be replaced by other civil servants. Sajid Javid, Boris Johnson's first chancellor, quit because he would not bow the knee and concede to Mr. Cummings, and the thirst to concentrate power around himself, only to be replaced by Chancellor Rishi Sunak, to become so much more popular than the Prime Minister, that he is now a threat to number 10 in a way that Javid could never have been. In the unconsequential contempt for the Conservative MPs soured the Prime Minister's relations with his own parliamentary party. That it was imperiling the capacity of government to get legislation through the Commons, and even endangering his position as Tory leader. The self-preservation was a crucial factor in the decision to terminate Cummings' chapter of Johnson's premiership. As power is removed from him and the clique of Vote Leave campaigners that he imported into Number 10, it is now worth asking how a gang with so few qualifications in government managed to capture the High Castle in the first place. The answer lies in the character of the Prime Minister. Mr. Johnson is an insecure loner who wants to be loved. He can be lazy, but it is probably more accurate to characterise him as ill-disciplined, remarks one senior civil servant. As a journalist, he was notorious for crashing deadlines. As Prime Minister, he quickly gained a reputation within government for being a procrastinator. He has instincts and enthusiasms, but he does not have many firm convictions. By contrast, Mr. Cummings was a brutal operator who didn't care who hated him, never displayed a drop of self-doubt, and blazed with fierce beliefs. Boris thought Dom filled in his gaps, says someone who ought to know, so much that the Prime Minister was prepared to sacrifice a huge amount of his personal political capital to make himself look pathetically dependent on the other man by refusing to sack the utterly uncontrite Mr. Cummings, even after his lockdown-busting excursions had ignited out among both Tory MPs and the public. To wait 6 months to get rid of him now makes the Prime Minister look doubly weak and foolish for not dispatching him then. Just as many were staggered by the Prime Minister's delegated so many of his powers to Mr. Cummings, so they have been bewildered that Cain, another component of the Vote Leave campaign, became Number 10's Director of Communications. He may have been anonymous to the public, but he was highly influential within the building. Before he attached himself to Mr. Johnson some years ago, Mr. Cain was a tabloid journalist, famous for being employed by the Daily Mail, famous for being employed by the Mirror, to troll David Cameron during the 2010 election by pursuing him dressed up in a chicken suit. The explanation for his rise for such shallow roots into a position of considerable power again lies in the character of the Prime Minister. Remember how duplicitous politicians can be whenever he catches sight of himself in the mirror. There are very few people he really trusts. And Mr. Cain gained a prominent place in the court, not because he's a genius communicator, but because he stayed loyal to Mr. Johnson during some of the strictest sketches of his pre-prime ministerial career. Allies of Mr. Cain say he was also one of the few people with the capacity to force habitually dithery Prime Minister to actually take decisions. A common complaint from the cabinet colleagues and officials is that Mr. Johnson has a tendency to agree with the last person who spoke to him. Remind you of George Bush, anyone? This means that a huge amount of power is wielded by whoever was the last person in the room. For a long time, it was usually Mr. Cummings who stayed in the room with the Prime Minister after everyone else had left. This is why a vicious power struggle erupted within Number 10 around the issue of who would fill the vacant position of Chief of Staff. All factions involved in the warring on Downing Street agreed that it boiled down to who controls Boris, which makes it sound less like a Prime Minister than a TV remote being wrestled away by squabbling aides. There, we already have some indications that Mr. Cummings was losing his grip on the prime ministerial clicker. To protect his assets and influence, he wanted the position of Chief of Staff to be filled by his mucker, Mr. Cain. He was opposed by a constellation of other forces, including Carrie Summons, the Prime Minister's fiancée, and Alecta Stratton, who was recently poached from the Chancellor's team to be the Prime Minister's press secretary. When they prevailed in this medieval-like struggle for the King's ear, it was goodbye to Mr. Cain and game over for Mr. Cummings. The question now preoccupying Westminster is whether this upheaval will lead to a change of style, performance and direction. Those Conservative MPs who have been long demanding a reset of the alternating and dysfunctional number 10 are fervently hoping it will. So should everyone else if it means that Johnson's government will evolve into a less hapless and more professional outfit than the amateurish, chaotic regime that has stumbled from calamity to U-turn to debacle to disaster through this epidemic. It is said much that none of it good, that an internal power struggle was consuming all the nervous energies of number 10 in the same week that the official death toll of the virus topped over 50,000. The approximate substantial figure, as Chief of Staff would say, many Tory MPs want to be accompanied by a reshuffle in the not too distant future to raise the competency level of the cabinet by kicking out the duds in place of the hyper-belligerent war with everyone on all fronts doctrine of the Cummings era. A less adversarial, more user-friendly style is apparently appearing and being urged by Prime Ministerial and his fiancée and the new press secretary. It may be relevant, but they are both female and the Brexit gang are overwhelmingly male. Tory moderates will be hoping that liberating Mr Johnson from Cummings will allow the Prime Minister to rediscover the liberal Tory he was as Mayor of London. There is another possible parallel from his period at the City Hall. His first year there had been characterised by those on the inside as shambolic and a complete omnishambles. It became less disorderly when the running of City Hall was essentially handed over behind the scenes to some grown-ups, Eddie Lister, and then leader of the Wandsworth Council, and then the late Sir Simon Malto, and then the leader of Westminster Council. Boris needs to find himself another Simon Moulton, comments one senior Tory. However, there's a snag with these theories though, and they come with a Boris-shaped hole. He can change his personnel, he can soften his tone and improve the messages of his government, but what he can't do is reform himself. Left to his own devices, Boris will wander off from decisions and read the penny or the parcels, or eat or shag, remarks one senior Tory, who is sat in the cabinet with the Prime Minister. The bit of self-knowledge that Boris has is that there needs to be someone who will sit him down at the table and say that there's decisions that need to be made and tell him that you're not leaving this room until you've made it. It was by being a person who cajoled decisions out of the Prime Minister that Mr Cummings made himself so powerful. He's now gone. The gap in Mr Johnson, that hole in the heart of government now remains, and there is now a vacancy, which means a fresh competition to be the new person who captures control of the Prime Minister by filling the empty vessel. And that's it. We've said it before. A lot of these Tories saying they want the old Boris back are referring to the time when he was at City Hall. But as we've said there, Boris wasn't in charge. He found people who he could just hand over his responsibilities, hand over his decision-making to, so that they could make the big calls and so that Boris could look good. This is why there's been so much disappointment from Boris, where he lost in an opinion poll over who was the better Mayor of London, him or Sadiq Khan. And Sadiq Khan beat him by a mile. And Boris was not happy at this. But this is a man who just wants to be loved. And this is someone who should not be the Prime Minister. He is just unfit on every single level. Just the fact that Mr Cummings had so much power over him. Just like you remember from the Bush days, the George W. Bush days, it was always Colin Powell and Dick Cheney who made sure they were the last two people in the room, so that regardless of what people had just said to Mr. Bush, theirs was the opinion he always listened to and took on. So, Cummings might be gone, but Boris ain't going to improve. The idea that the Tories are somehow going to capture this old Boris, unless, the people who comes in is somehow going to, make Boris better, which isn't. Basically, they're going to be the ones making the decisions, and thereby making Boris look good, then they'll be happy with. And that's, I think, part of the reason why Boris didn't let Cummings go because he made him at some point look good. But as we now know, apparently it was because he was sending very derogatory text about the Prime Minister's girlfriend. That's apparently why he was sacked. So there you go. But yes, a power struggle in number 10 at this point is going to get very, very messy. So expect more of that to come. So with that, thanks for watching. Please do hit that like and share button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page. And thank you very much to the people who do support me that way. And of course, we'll see you all next time.